She was chained to a streetlight like garbage. A lioness, soaked in the coldest rain you can possibly imagine, shivering so violently her bones looked like they might crack. Mark Taylor nearly missed her. The road was drowning in mud and shadows, and the storm hammered his windshield so hard it sounded like the sky was breaking apart. He was just trying to keep a promise, to visit his daughter's grave before sunset, like he did every Thursday for the last 6 years. But then he saw her, and the world stopped spinning. At first glance, she looked like a large dog, maybe injured, maybe dead. But as his headlights swung just right, the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. A lioness, her golden fur caked in dark sludge, ribs jutting from her sides like sharpened wire. She was tied by the neck to a crumbling streetlight on a stretch of forgotten highway, surrounded by tall, wet grass and absolute silence. Her eyes locked on his truck with a haunting calm. Not wild, not panicked, just hollow. Mark hit the brakes so hard his tires skidded sideways on the gravel. The truck fishtailed, then stopped. The engine hummed, the heater hissed, and he sat there frozen, staring through the rain. She didn't belong here. This wasn't a nature reserve, wasn't a zoo, wasn't even close to anything resembling civilization. It was a rural dead zone in southern Georgia. The nearest gas station had shut down 3 years ago, and yet here she was, royal, broken, and completely alone. He stepped out. The cold was immediate and vicious, slicing through his flannel and jeans like knives. The wind whipped the rain sideways, soaking his face, his boots, his heart. He approached slowly, boots sinking into the mud, his breath visible in the air. She didn't growl, didn't retreat. She just stood there, head low, eyes never leaving his. As he got closer, he saw the metal chain was looped tightly around her neck, digging into raw skin. Blood mixed with water, running down her shoulder in slow, trembling lines. Mark swallowed hard. Up close, she was breathtaking in the worst possible way. Emaciated, covered in scars, and so still she barely seemed alive. Her paws were cracked and swollen, nails chipped and bleeding, the pads shredded from God knows what. Her breathing was shallow but steady, like she was trying not to die but wasn't entirely committed to living either. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging him, not as a threat, not even as a hope, just as a witness. He wanted to speak, but no words came, only the roar of rain, the sound of wind ripping through the fields, and the slow rattle of her chain as she adjusted her weight. Somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted. Not pity, something more violent. Rage, helplessness, the realization that someone had done this on purpose. Someone had left her here to suffer, to vanish in the storm, and nobody was coming. Except him. He knelt, 20 feet from her, not daring to get closer yet. He knew enough about animals to know when one had nothing left. This lioness wasn't going to attack. She wasn't going to run. She'd already been through something worse than fear. He could see it in the way she held herself, proud and broken at the same time. She still remembered what it meant to be powerful, but no longer had the strength to prove it. Mark's mind flashed to his daughter, Molly, age 10, gone in seconds on a rainy night just like this. Her favorite animal had been lions. Her room was filled with drawings, figurines, little plastic models she'd line up by the windowsill. On the day they buried her, he'd kept one in his pocket, a lioness with one paw raised, as if guarding something invisible. He hadn't touched that toy in years. It was still in the glove box waiting, just like this creature in front of him. He stood slowly, pulled off his coat, and walked toward her. Not fast, not slow. The lioness didn't flinch, just watched him with those impossibly ancient eyes. He held the coat above her head, shielding her from the rain, even if only a little. She blinked again. That's all. But something about it felt like trust, or at least surrender. And in that moment, the tears came hard and fast, pouring down his face like the sky itself had cracked open inside him. A crack of thunder exploded behind them, and the lioness trembled ever so slightly. Mark didn't move. He wasn't thinking about what came next, or how insane this all was. He just knew one thing. He couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not when every part of her suffering felt like a mirror to his own. The rain kept falling. The wind kept howling. And somewhere deep in that Georgia storm, something broken in both of them began, just barely, to breathe. Mark pulled his truck closer, headlights illuminating every fragile detail of her body. Her legs trembled under her own weight, and one paw was so swollen it looked twice its normal size. The chain around her neck had been looped several times, then secured with a bolt that had rusted shut. This wasn't a careless mistake. It was intentional, cruel, deliberate. Someone had meant for her to be found like this, or not found at all. And now, with the storm worsening and night creeping in, Mark realized he was completely alone with her. He dialed 911 with shaking fingers, but the signal bars flickered and dropped to 0. No service. Of course not. This was a dead zone, the same one his truck's GPS always warned him about. He looked back at the lioness, who hadn't moved an inch. Her sides rose and fell slowly, like each breath was a negotiation with pain. Mark knew he couldn't lift her. He couldn't move her without help. But every second out here was another second closer to death. From shock, infection, or just plain cold. He ran back to the truck, searching frantically through the back seat and under the seat. He found a crowbar, a tarp, and a few old bungee cords. No food, no tranquilizer, nothing that would actually help in this situation. He cursed under his breath, gripping the wheel with both hands, staring into the storm. He could drive off and get help, but by the time he came back, if he came back, she'd be gone. Washed away by the storm, taken by whoever had left her, or just given up. Back outside, he tried the crowbar on the chain, wedging it into the bolt and pushing with all the force his 62-year-old body could manage. His muscles screamed, his back seized, but the chain didn't budge. The lioness let out the faintest sound, not a growl, not even a whimper, just a low, broken exhale that stopped him cold. He looked into her eyes again, and in that second, he saw it. She didn't expect to be saved. She'd already accepted her fate. Mark stood there, drenched to the bone, heart hammering, chest aching. He remembered the last time he'd felt this powerless, standing over his daughter's hospital bed, listening to a flatline, holding a stuffed lion in his hand with nothing left to say. That night, he had walked out into the rain and kept walking for hours, hoping to feel anything. He hadn't cried then, not like this. But now, watching this lioness fade right in front of him, something inside cracked wide open. He threw the crowbar down with a roar of frustration and did something he hadn't done in years. He dropped to his knees and prayed. Not for a miracle, not for strength, just for a chance to do one thing right. He whispered, voice shaking, "Please, and not her too." The lioness's head lifted slightly, eyes catching his again. It felt like she heard him, like something in her recognized that this pain wasn't hers alone. Minutes passed. Rain poured. Lightning flashed across the empty fields. Mark made a decision. He unclipped the emergency light from his truck's dashboard, planted it beside her, and turned it on, flashing red and white, a beacon in the dark. Then he got in the truck, turned the hazards on, and hit the horn. Not once, not twice, over and over. Long, blaring sounds that echoed across the fields like a signal flare. He didn't know who might hear. A farmer, a state trooper, a kid out walking a dog. But he couldn't leave her. Not even for help. Not now. He sat beside her again, tarp over her back, his coat still raised, shielding her head. Her breathing slowed. Not from weakness, but from calm. She was watching him differently now. Not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as something else entirely. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stayed. And that's when he saw it. Headlights, faint in the distance, wobbling down the road. His heart jumped. Someone was coming. Someone had heard. He whispered to her, barely audible through the rain. "We're not done yet, girl. Stay with me, just a little longer." The lioness didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just watched the lights grow brighter, as if she too was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't how her story had to end. The approaching vehicle slowed as it neared, its tires splashing through the rain-flooded road, beams cutting through the darkness like hope itself. Mark stood up, waving both arms wildly in front of the hazard lights. "Over here!" he shouted, voice hoarse and cracking. The lioness stayed where she was, too weak to rise, but her eyes followed the car, steady and alert. It was a rusted-out SUV, probably 20 years old, and it pulled up beside his truck with a cautious crawl. The driver's window rolled down halfway. Inside was a woman in her 50s, soaking wet and wide-eyed, with a teenage boy in the passenger seat holding a blanket. "Is that real?" she asked, eyes flicking from Mark to the lioness. "Is that an actual lion?" Mark nodded once, breathless. "She's alive," he said, "but barely. I need help, please." The woman hesitated for a second, then threw the car into park and stepped out into the rain without another word, her son close behind. They worked together without discussing it. The boy knelt by the lioness and gently draped the blanket over her back. She didn't resist. The woman pulled out her phone and, to Mark's relief, had full signal. She called animal control, spoke calmly but urgently, giving them coordinates and every detail she could. "They said someone will be here in 20 minutes, she told him. "Maybe 30, but they're coming." Mark looked back at the lioness. Her eyes had closed. She was still breathing. Slower now. Deeper. Still here. Mark dropped to his knees beside her again, one hand gently resting on the tarp over her shoulder. The boy crouched across from him, whispering softly to her like she was a scared dog. "She's not shaking anymore," he said. Mark looked and saw he was right. The trembling had stopped. Her body, though still weak and thin, looked less tense. For the first time that night, Mark let himself believe that maybe she'd survive. Maybe they would. When animal control arrived, it wasn't a van or a truck. It was a full response team with a tranquilizer specialist, a mobile vet, and a custom-fitted transport cage. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a scar across his cheek, studied the scene for a moment, then turned to Mark. "You the one who found her?" he asked. Mark nodded. "Stayed with her?" Another nod. The man exhaled, shook his head slowly. "She's lucky. Real lucky." The vet approached the lioness with practiced calm. He administered a light sedative through a long syringe pole, just enough to keep her from panicking during the move. "She's in pain," he murmured, "but she's a fighter. She held out longer than most would have." Mark didn't say anything, just watched, silent and still, as the team worked. They lifted her gently onto a stretcher, secured her with straps, then moved her into the crate with a kind of reverence. As the doors clicked shut, Mark felt a strange emptiness flood in. The lead officer circled back to him. "We'll get her to the shelter in Macon. She'll get full medical attention. After that, depends. Maybe a sanctuary, maybe out of state." Mark looked down, fists clenched, unsure of what to say. "Can I see her again?" he asked. The officer paused, then nodded. "We'll make that happen." Then he leaned in a little closer. "You didn't just find her. You kept her alive. That counts." The SUV woman gave Mark a soft pat on the arm before heading back to her car with her son. "You saved her," she said quietly. "You really did." Mark nodded, eyes misting. But deep down, he wasn't sure who had saved who. The lioness was gone now, secured and safe, but the ache in his chest had changed. It was still there, the loss, the weight, but it felt less like a wound and more like something he could finally carry. That night, back at home, Mark didn't sleep. He sat by the window, the stuffed lioness from Molly's room clutched in both hands. The rain had stopped, the silence outside thick and sacred. He thought about those eyes, not just wild, but wise. The way she had looked at him, the way she hadn't given up, even when she had every reason to. And somehow, in keeping her alive, he'd found a reason to keep going himself. At sunrise, his phone buzzed. A text from the vet's office. "She made it through the night, stable, alert, eating." Mark stared at the screen for a long time, tears falling silently down his cheeks. He walked outside barefoot, letting the early light wash over him. The wind smelled clean again, like the earth had been forgiven. For the first time in years, Mark didn't feel like he was running from something. He felt like he was walking toward something new. 2 weeks later, Mark stood in front of a tall steel gate marked Wild Haven Sanctuary, authorized personnel only. He held a clipboard in one hand, and in the other, a small brown paper bag. Inside it, a plastic lioness, the same one that had ridden in his glove box for 6 long years. The sanctuary director had personally invited him for a private visit. "She's adapting better than we expected," she had told him over the phone. "You gave her a chance. The least we can do is let her see you again." Mark's heart pounded as the gate slid open. Inside, the facility was quiet, peaceful. Trees swayed gently in the wind, and the scent of warm hay and pine filled the air. Mark was guided to an enclosure set far back from the main trail. "We've kept her in medical recovery for now," the staff member explained. "She's eating on her own. Trust is coming slowly, but it's coming." As they approached the tall fencing, Mark saw her, lying under a shaded platform, golden fur finely clean, eyes half closed in the afternoon light. She looked whole. The staffer motioned for Mark to approach the inner fence. "Don't reach in," she said gently. "Just let her come to you." Mark nodded and stepped forward. His boots crunched on gravel. The lioness lifted her head, ears twitching, then slowly rose to her feet. Their eyes met again, and something ancient passed between them. Not fear, not curiosity, recognition. She walked forward with careful steps, paused just a foot from the inner fence, and sat. Mark smiled, tears already spilling down his face. He knelt and placed the small plastic lioness gently on the ground in front of the fence. "I think she'd want you to have it," he said, voice shaking. The lioness tilted her head slightly, then laid down in front of the figure, eyes never leaving his. She blinked, slow and calm, the same blink she had given him in the rain, the same wordless message, "I'm still here, and so are you." Mark sat in silence for a long time, watching her breathe, her chest rising and falling like the rhythm of a tide coming home. After that visit, Mark came every week, not out of guilt, but out of connection. The sanctuary offered him a volunteer role, transporting supplies, fixing fences, eventually helping with tours. He took it. His hands, once idle and tired, found new purpose in small tasks, feeding goats, repairing crates, picking up medicine from town. The lioness, now named Mara, would watch him from her enclosure each time he passed, and over time she began to rest closer to the fence, unafraid. Neighbors began to notice the change in Mark. The man who rarely left his house was now leading sanctuary tours for local schools. The man who hadn't smiled in years was now telling kids about big cats and their stories of survival. "She came out of nowhere," he'd say, "but she brought something with her. A kind of light you only see in storms." And every time he said it, he looked toward Mara's enclosure, and she'd be there, watching, steady, alive. The sanctuary launched a fundraiser with Mark and Mara as the face of the campaign. The story of the storm, the rescue, and the bond that saved them both went viral. Donations poured in, schools sent letters. A group of local artists painted a mural near the entrance, a man holding an umbrella over a lioness in the rain, with the words, "Seen, chosen, saved." Mark wept when he saw it, not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. On the 6th anniversary of Molly's death, Mark brought a single white flower to Mara's enclosure. She walked up to him, closer than she ever had, and rested her head against the fence. No sound, no movement, just presence. Mark whispered, "Thank you," not just to her, but to the world for giving him one more chance to feel something real. In her eyes, he saw not just an animal, but the echo of a little girl who had once believed in lions. Mark still visited the cemetery, but now he brought stories, not just silence. He told Molly about Mara's recovery, about the school tours, about the kids who wrote letters saying they wanted to protect animals too. And for the first time in 6 years, he stopped blaming himself. The road he'd traveled was never meant to end in grief. It was meant to lead to something greater, something living. He wasn't just a man who found a lioness. He was a man who found himself beside her in the freezing dark and decided to stay. That decision changed everything. Because healing, it turned out, didn't roar. It blinked. It breathed. It waited. And sometimes it looked at you with golden eyes through a wall of rain and said, "Not yet." He didn't just save a lioness. He found the part of himself that had stopped fighting, and this time, he brought it home.